Spoiler alert. Please be advised that the following video will contain spoilers for Lovecraft Country. What's up, everybody? It's me, E-Man from E-Man's Movie Reviews. Oh, wow. Talk about a mind-bending episode. This series continues to go down these weird, wild, and crazy paths, and I'm here for it. I love it. Now it seems like it's Hippolyta's turn for us to dig a little bit deeper into her character, and we also are going to get some more answers for some other situations as well. So let's try and break this episode down and try to make sense of everything that happened, because there's a lot to cover. Hippolyta goes back to Braithwaite's residence to find some more answers about Uncle George's death. She finds Dee's comic book page in the rubble, which confirms that Uncle George was actually there and probably wasn't shot by the sheriff as Montrose and Tick had previously told her. While looking at the Ori, she discovers that the reason why the Ori wasn't working was because it didn't have the planets tilting on their respective axis. After making the proper adjustments, she unlocks the Ori and finds the hidden key. There's a phrase engraved on the Ori that says, "Every beginning is in time and every limit of extension in space." According to the coordinates, she's heading straight to Kansas. Now we head on to Christina, and it looks like we finally learned the truth about what happened with William. Both William and the other white lady that Ruby transformed into were apparently real people. They just happened to die, but Christina used their blood to make her magic potion. Apparently, Christina was telling the truth. William was next in line to be the leader of the lodge, but he was killed by the racist police captain. Christina wants revenge for William and more. Before his death, William was seduced by Christina into teaching her about magic. At first, she wanted to impress her father, but the more she learned, the bigger her ambitions became. Ruby accused Christina of lying to her, especially after sleeping with her as William. But Christina said that everything she told Ruby was actually true. So I wonder now, does this mean that Christina is kind of like more progressive than we initially thought? I mean, could Christina be a part of the LGBTQ community as maybe bi and trans? Either way, Christina told Ruby that she was going to tell her the entire truth. Now, what's interesting here is Christina mentioned to Ruby that Ruby's family is now tied to the Book of Names. Could Christina actually know that something is going on with Letty and Tick, or is she alluding to some other connection to Ruby's family? Speaking of Letty, she's having the same dream as Tick, where she's running after Hannah in the burning house. She sees that she's pregnant in the dream and suddenly burns up. Now, the main difference between her dream and Tick's dream was that she was pregnant and Hannah did not try to speak to her. And in her conversations with Tick, Letty conveniently forgot to mention to Tick that she was also pregnant in the dream. Meanwhile, Montrose is getting mighty comfortable now, even though he and his partner still have to lay low. As the couple appear to be arguing, Tick and Letty run up on them, and rumors of Montrose's sexuality are basically confirmed for Tick. Now, I just want to kind of remind some people that, this is still the 1950s, so it's not going to be as progressive as, we would all maybe hope. And in this situation, Tick is extremely pissed off. And I don't really think that his father's sexuality is the real source of his anger. I mean, sure, Tick doesn't like to be lied to as anybody else wouldn't, but it would appear as though Tick's real source of anger here is because of all the abuse that Montrose put him through. Tick surmised that the years of abuse were all a projection of Montrose. In addition to that, I think what's really going on here is that Tick is blaming Montrose for the violent nature that was passed down to Tick. Back in episode 5, Tick mentioned to Letty in regard to that violence in Montrose, Tick thought it could never be in him, but he found that violence when he went to war. Plus, Tick also tried to rationalize to himself, as some abuse victims may also do, that the abuse he suffered was a form of love. So when it comes down to it, I think Tick is blaming Montrose for that twisted version of love and that learned violent behavior, which basically led and pushed Tick into volunteering to go serve in the war and go through even more mental anguish. Moving on to Hippolyta, she's getting ready to follow those coordinates from the Ori. She asked her daughter Dee to go over the checklist, and Dee started copping an attitude. Hold up. Who did Dee think she was talking to? Hey, I get it, she's still processing her father's death and passing. I get it. It can be, traumatic. But what we not gonna do is deal with that kind of lip. I mean, she must think she grown now. Now don't get it twisted. I'm a girl dad through and through. But let me find out that one of my daughters was back talking to their mama like that? Look, I don't care if I'm dead. I'm gonna come back from the grave if I need to. We not gonna play that game, little girl. She better check that mouth and fix her face. Sorry, that just got on my parental nerves. Anyway, Hippolyta snapped at Tick mainly because of her anger for being lied to about George being shot by the sheriff. Ruby and Letty have a nice chat about their issues too. And I want to give some credit to Letty. I thought she was real grown and mature with this because she approached Ruby, in order to apologize to her for not telling her about the money that was left to her. While Hippolyta is on the road, she gets passed up by a black female motorcyclist. And just as a FYI, for those of you who don't know, that was actually Bessie Stringfield. She was the first African-American motorcyclist woman to ride across the United States solo and was one of the few civilian motorcycle dispatch riders for the U.S. Army during World War II. Tick makes it to St. Louis to talk to his mother's cousin thanks to the info they got from Montrose. Look, all I know is them place was looking pretty scrumptious. According to this cousin, it seems like the Book of Names may have actually been burnt up during the Tulsa Massacre. And yet, another L thanks to racism, and I really hope that that's not the case. I mean, come on now. A book as powerful as that, I would only hope that it would have to be fireproof at least. We go back to Letty, and all of a sudden, she can't stand the smell of garlic, and she's having hot flashes. Talking about she developed some weird allergy. She ain't developed no weird allergies. That girl done caught the preggers. Back to Tick, he's going through the family photo album and he notices a familiar birthmark. Before he could think more about it, Letty calls him up and lets him know that Hippolyta has the Ori and that she knows that they've lied to her about Uncle George. At this point, it looks like all these paths are eventually going to collide. Letty and Tick know that Hippolyta is going to the engraved location, and you got Ruby out here being a peeping Tom, being nosy once again. And now Ruby knows about all these coordinates and stuff too. But here's my thing. How much does Ruby actually know thanks to Christina? Do you think that Ruby's still working with Christina in exchange for more magic? Do you think that they might actually have a magical relationship still? Just let me know if you think Ruby still has maybe some ulterior motives. Hippolyta makes it to Kansas and arrives at the observatory. She uses the key and gets the device to start working. By the way, I just have to say, I really loved what this scene was showing here. I feel like we don't always get to see enough representation of black folks not being resourceful or not being witty or anything like that, but like being genius level smart. I'm just really loving the representation here. Got the smart black woman. I love it. Go on with your Hidden Figures bad self with the astronomical, geographic, mathematics and stuff. Now the police come through and you could hear that it was at the behest of Captain Lancaster. Remember that racist police captain with the black body torso? Seems like the lodges know about the device, but they don't know how to make it work without the key from the Ori. And that was exactly what the racist captain wanted from Christina. Tick thankfully comes to the rescue, and the machine starts to go haywire after catching a stray bullet. Man, Tick must be a special kind of brave to run headfirst at two armed police officers like that. Anyway, the machine starts opening up a number of portals, and Tick tosses one of the officers inside. Hippolyta meanwhile shoots the other officer. Then both Tick and Hippolyta get sucked into the portal. And this is where I thought I started losing my mind. This just started getting weird. Take a look at this spacecraft or building or whatever it was. It kind of looked like a beating heart. And then you got the alien robot things or something. I'm just sitting here like, whoa, man, y'all just went there. Hippolyta wakes up naked with some strange implants in her wrists. And this kind of makes you wonder, like, what kind of other surgeries did they perform on her? And who is this afro-headed cyborg giant lady? Okay, first of all, let me just say that all of this is just really going to be my best interpretation of what happens. I can't say anything here with 100% certainty at all. So, of course, if any of you have any better insight, please leave them down in the comments because a lot of this stuff is just really out there. And let me also say that I am not an expert with coordinates or anything like that. And the best I could do was just plug this stuff into Google Maps. Anyway, from what I could decipher, the first set of coordinates seems to be kind of like the longitude and latitude, but then the third set of coordinates might have to do with time. What I thought was interesting was that when I plugged in the first set of coordinates in Google Maps, even though they're in this weird world, it still came up as Hippolyta being in Kansas. And this just kind of got me thinking. In the previous episodes, we saw that there was kind of like a National Treasure, Indiana Jones type of vibe, right? And with all this weird stuff going on with Kansas and Hippolyta, I was kind of thinking that this was like a different weird version of the Wizard of Oz. I mean, you do have a giant Afro alien, and maybe that's the wizard in this whole story. You know what? I take that back. This is too black for the Wizard of Oz. This is clearly the Wiz. Anyway, when Hippolyta asks, "Who are you?" the giant Afro cyborg says, "I am." Now that right there, I already know can go so many different ways. I'm sure people can come up with a bunch of different theories and stuff for it. I mean, the very first thing that comes to my mind, of course, when you hear "I am," you can draw from the Abrahamic faith traditions, with God saying that I am that I am. And another translation of that is "I will be what I will be." So I wonder if there's some sort of connection there. I mean, given the fact that like the entire theme of this is finding one's identity and all, I could see how people would want to draw the whole, notion of you are gods and we are gods and whatever. But I'll let y'all play around with that if you want to. Hippolyta tries to escape, running a number of different theories and calculations in her mind. She even started to sabotage the cell until the Afro cyborg lady came back for her. She's continuously told that she's not in prison and to name herself, and she was asked, "Where do you want to be?" The moment Hippolyta says where she wants to be, she's in Paris dancing with Josephine Baker. For those of you who don't know, Josephine Baker was an African-American entertainer and dancer who became extremely popular in France during the 1930s and later. She not only danced, but she could also sing and act. She was the first African American to star in a major feature film. Not only that, but she also served as a spy for the French resistance during World War II. Beyond that, she was also a civil rights activist. She wouldn't perform in venues that didn't allow black visitors, and she also helped to desegregate Las Vegas venues and casinos. She led a very remarkable life, and I'd strongly encourage you look her up. Back to the story. By finding this newfound freedom in Paris, Hippolyta saw that she was robbed of something in America. She was robbed of her freedom to be herself. Essentially, she's been playing the role, so to speak, of the type of black woman that white people wanted her to be. That actually kind of reminded me of like, I think it was W.E.B. Du Bois who was talking about like the double consciousness, where like, you end up seeing yourself as the oppressor sees you. So if the oppressor sees you as lesser than, then that's the way you're going to see yourself. And I wonder if that was kind of what was going on with Hippolyta in this case. She goes on to say that it felt like a smart way to lynch her without people noticing. And she said that she felt like she wanted to kill white folks. But she also hates herself for letting them make her feel so small. Man, that was heavy. I think the fact that she's even thinking about the idea of killing white people. But before anyone even starts calling reverse racism or whatever, let me point something out first. In my opinion, this is just the poison of racism. I mean, hate begets hate. And Hippolyta is really just expressing what she feels as a result of the hatred and treatment that she's endured in her life. I mean, think of it like this. Racism causes a vicious cycle where you have, in this case, one group of people oppressing the other, and the oppressed end up hating the oppressor. At the same time, those oppressed people end up hating themselves for being oppressed to such a low level. And I just wanted to say that because I think sometimes people tend to like overlook the initial cause of the pain and only want to focus on the attack that the symptoms exhibited. I mean, let's really take a moment and look at the whole picture first. If there was no racism, there would be no one thinking about killing someone else because of the color of their skin to begin with. And if I were to have to like reference the movie Get Out, I would say that Hippolyta is like in an advanced stage of the sunken place. The real Hippolyta was buried deep down, and what we saw on the outside was just a facade. I would say that this is actually something very similar to a reality that some black people still have to face in today's society. I mean, this is very similar to what a lot of people of color, specifically black people, have to go through with the term of code switching. And if you don't know what code switching is, it's essentially when a person of color has to switch back and forth between white culture. And that can come in any different form, like talking white or acting white. If you want a visual representation of what I'm talking about, go check out the movie Sorry to Bother You. Back to the story, after declaring that she is Hippolyta, she's transported to what looks like an all-female African Amazonian warrior type of tribe. Her journey seems to be tied to whatever she actually names herself to be. So as her name suggests in classical Greek mythology, Hippolyta was the daughter of Ares, aka the god of war, and her mother was Otrera, aka the queen of the Amazons. And from the looks of it, Hippolyta picked up the warrior spirit real fast. Look, I don't know about you, but I'm a Marvel fan, so like when I saw all of this, I was getting some Dora Milaje type of vibes from Wakanda. Man, I was real close to just being like, Yibambe, Yibambe. I love how they kind of like borrowed from 300 with this, with only a few Amazonian African warriors against a huge army of Confederate colonizers. Well, Hippolyta got to live out her wish of killing white people that she probably hated the most. Before the battle could continue, Hippolyta makes another self-declaration and calls herself George's wife. She appears in bed with Uncle George and starts to tell him about her adventures. Remember when she was trying to escape and she was doing all those calculations and equations? It turns out that those experiments she was doing was a way to confirm the equations found in the many worlds theory. Now, according to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, it holds that there are many worlds which exist in parallel at the same space and time as our own. And from what I quickly researched, this is not the same as the multiverse. But you all are free to dig into that level of quantum physics on your own. To make it a little simpler, if the many worlds theory is true, then she's not really time traveling per se. She's traveling to different parallel versions of other worlds that exist at the same time and place as our own. As we later find out, thanks to the devices in her wrist, they give her the ability to travel between these worlds. If any of this is confusing, I'll post some links in the description that might help to explain this many world theory a little bit better. But hold up, gotta give a shout out to Uncle George. Woo, I got so excited when I saw Uncle George back. Cause y'all know, man, I was missing my Uncle George, y'all. During her conversation with Uncle George 2.0, she realizes that yet another reason why she's been so angry all this time. She was angry because she's been shrinking. Some of this shrinking she's been doing to herself too. She was essentially becoming lost and losing her identity. When she met the original Uncle George, she thought that Uncle George saw her for being more than what she was, but he unfortunately let her continue to shrink. Uncle George 2.0 was wondering why didn't she say anything, but according to Hippolyta, she did actually say something, but it just happened to be in more passive-aggressive ways. Recall back to episode 1, Hippolyta mentioned that she wanted to take a trip by herself for the guidebook. The original Uncle George shut that down, but that was mainly out of concern and fear for her safety out in the open road, but nevertheless, that was still the shrinking at play. So she felt as though Uncle George didn't let her grow, and she shrunk back into the supportive wife role and made way for him to do whatever he wanted to do. Now, to the original Uncle George's credit, he did later on, I think it was like in episode 2 when he called up Hippolyta, he did mention to her that, maybe they should actually go out on a trip together. Now, that is not the same as letting her go off and do her own thing, but it was a little bit of progress. Anyway, Uncle George 2.0 sees the error of his ways, and more importantly, he sees Hippolyta, and she acknowledges that she is once again Hippolyta, the Discoverer, and her wrists start to glow as she takes the new Uncle George's hand, and they're transported to yet another new world. Both her and the new Uncle George are exploring these worlds and interacting even with aliens. Now, if you're a Marvel fan like I am, then you probably already started thinking like, yo, they just jumped into the quantum realm. And I really loved all the visuals that were going on here. But more importantly, she brought Uncle George 2.0 with her. So now I'm over here thinking, hey, bring 2.0 with you back to your regular time. Please and thank you. Well, now Hippolyta is transported back to some place in space, and the Afro cyborg is now just a giant woman. Maybe the robotic stuff was just a suit of armor or something. She tells Hippolyta that after naming herself, she can fully integrate into their society, and she no longer needs the devices on her wrists. She has an option now to make a permanent change and become like these beings, or to go back to Earth during her time in space. Well, she makes the decision to go back for the sake of her daughter Dee, and she better have fixed her face by that time too. Well, instead of Hippolyta, it's Tick that actually came back, and this time he's back with a Lovecraft Country book in hand. As the police sirens approach, we're left with Dee's comic book sitting on the floor. Okay, so this is kind of weird. Like, did Hippolyta turn into a comic book? I mean, she was dressed up as the character. What do you think the real connection is between Hippolyta and Dee's comic? Now, with all of this stuff that's happening, I'd be lying if I said my head was not spinning with ideas. Because now I'm wondering, where did Tick go all this time? Why does he have that book? And this is kind of a weird one, is it possible that all the weird stuff that we saw in episode 1 with Tick's dream, could that have actually been another reality that Tick traveled to? Well, look, hey, that's all my brain could take for this episode. Hopefully this video shed a little bit of light to help you understand what was going on. Hopefully it didn't confuse you too much either. I mean, this episode was out of this world, but like for real. So what did you think? What were like your favorite moments of the episode? If you have any additional insight or theories, please leave them down in the comments because I'd love to read them. And I'm more than positive that some of y'all probably picked up on more stuff or noticed things that I might have missed. So please let me know. Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video. I really, really do appreciate it. Be sure to join me next week right after episode 8 so we can talk about it and dissect the whole thing. If you're new here and if you like what you see, like this video, subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell so you don't miss out the next time I drop a video. In the meantime, I've got more videos and reviews to do for you all, and until next time, I'll see you all later.